There are places where food comes from farther away than people realize. Not from another town, not from another state, from deep inside the wilderness, brought back by people no one truly knows. And sometimes, when you buy something without asking where it came from, you don't just bring dinner home. You bring something else with it. My name is Daniel. For most of my life, I made my living on the river. I lived with my wife, Claire, and our 2 young children in a quiet fishing village where almost everyone survived from the water. Every morning before sunrise, I took my small boat out onto the river. By noon, I was back at the docks selling fish before heading home. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest. Every Saturday, the village square filled with market stalls. Fresh fish, fruit, cassava flour, vegetables, homemade preserves. People laughed, bargained, and caught up on the week's gossip while children ran between the tables. Near the edge of the market, however, there was always one stall that felt strangely out of place. It never had a sign. The man running it never called out to customers. He never smiled. He simply stood there behind neat rows of freshly cut wild game. Capybara, armadillo, paca, animals that hunters occasionally brought out of the forest. Everyone knew the seller by one name, Derek. No last name, no family. No one seemed to know where he lived. He always arrived alone in a narrow canoe shortly after sunrise. By late morning, he was gone again. No one ever remembered seeing him leave. I bought meat from him once in a while. It was always fresh, always clean, always reasonably priced. Nothing about it ever gave me a reason to worry. Until one Saturday. That morning, something different rested on his wooden table. The meat was darker than anything I had seen before. The fibers looked unusually fine, almost too perfect. I pointed at it. "What animal is that?" Derek looked at me for a long moment before answering. It came from the deep woods. His voice was flat, calm. "Strong meat. Good for roasting." That was all he said. I waited for more. He simply kept looking at me. Something about his eyes unsettled me. They weren't angry or threatening. They were empty, as though he'd stopped reacting to the world a very long time ago. I almost walked away. Almost. Instead, I asked for several pounds. He wrapped the meat in brown paper without another word. When he handed it to me, our fingers brushed for only an instant. His skin was freezing cold, far colder than the morning air. As I turned to leave, I had the strange feeling that he was still watching me. When I glanced back, he hadn't moved. He was standing exactly where I'd left him, staring silently, as if he already knew I would be coming back. Claire had dinner waiting by the time I got home. She unwrapped the package and paused for a moment. "This doesn't look like anything we've had before." I set my fishing gear by the door. The seller said it came from deep in the woods. She smiled. "Well, I guess we'll find out." She seasoned the meat with garlic, herbs, black pepper, and coarse salt before placing it in the oven with potatoes and vegetables. Within minutes, the entire house filled with its aroma. It smelled incredible, rich, savory, the kind of smell that makes your stomach growl before the food even reaches the table. Nothing about it seemed unusual. If anything, it smelled better than any wild game I had ever eaten. That should have been my first warning. Some things hide behind familiar scents. When dinner was ready, the 4 of us gathered around the table. The children couldn't wait. Claire carved the roast into thick slices, letting the juices run across the cutting board before serving everyone. The meat was perfectly cooked, tender, moist, almost falling apart beneath the knife. I picked up my fork. For a brief second, I noticed something strange. The surface of the meat reflected the kitchen light in an odd way. Not enough to alarm me, just enough to make me hesitate. Then I took my first bite. The texture was perfect. Soft. Almost buttery. At first, it tasted exactly like roasted game. Then, something changed. A sweetness spread slowly across my tongue. Not the sweetness of honey. Not fruit. Not barbecue sauce. Something heavier. Warmer. Almost addictive. It lingered long after I swallowed. I reached for my glass of water. The taste remained. Claire continued eating without saying anything. The kids cleaned their plates happily. No one else seemed to notice. Only me. I tried another bite. The same sweetness returned. It wasn't unpleasant. That was what bothered me most. It was too pleasant. Almost as if every bite made me want another before I had even finished chewing. By the end of dinner, I had eaten far more than usual. Even so, I didn't feel completely satisfied. That night, I couldn't fall asleep. I kept turning over in bed. Every time I closed my eyes, that strange flavor came back. I could almost taste it again. The sweetness clung stubbornly to the back of my tongue. I brushed my teeth twice. Then a third time. Still there. Sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally pulled me into a restless sleep. When I opened my eyes the next morning, sunlight was already pouring through the bedroom window. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. Then I noticed something I couldn't explain. There was dried blood beneath my fingernails. And I had absolutely no memory of leaving the bed. I sat up so quickly that my head started spinning. For a moment, I simply stared at my hands. Thin streaks of dried blood had settled beneath my fingernails, dark against my skin. I turned them over. There were no cuts, no scratches, nothing that explained where it had come from. A strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I couldn't remember waking up during the night. I couldn't remember leaving the bedroom. Beside me, Claire was still asleep, peaceful, completely unaware. I slipped quietly out of bed and walked toward the kitchen. Halfway down the hallway, I noticed another smell. Not breakfast, not coffee, fresh blood. The closer I got to the sink, the stronger it became. My pulse quickened. A dinner plate sat inside the basin. Its surface was streaked with red. Not sauce. Not leftover juices from the roast. Blood. Still wet around the edges. For several long seconds, I couldn't move. I stared at the plate, trying to force some reasonable explanation into my mind. Nothing fit. I opened the refrigerator. The container holding the leftover roast was still there. I reached for it. Empty. Every last piece of meat was gone. I frowned. No, that couldn't be right. I would have remembered eating it. Wouldn't I? Daniel. Claire's sleepy voice came from behind me. I turned. She looked from my face to the sink, then to the empty container in my hands. Did you eat the leftovers last night? The answer refused to come. I don't think so. You don't think so? She stepped closer, looking genuinely confused. There was enough for another dinner. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then her eyes drifted toward the plate in the sink. Her expression changed immediately. What happened here? I looked again. The blood suddenly seemed darker than before. Thicker. Almost fresh. I don't know. And for the first time since buying that meat, I realized I wasn't lying. The days that followed became harder to explain. It started quietly. A thought that appeared while I was repairing fishing nets. A craving that interrupted conversations. An image of that roast crossing my mind for no reason at all. By the middle of the week, It was all I could think about. Fish no longer smelled appetizing. Rice tasted like nothing. Bread felt dry and lifeless. Every meal disappointed me. No matter how much I ate, I stayed hungry. Not hungry for food. Hungry for that meat. The strange sweetness haunted every waking moment. Sometimes I could almost smell it even when there was nothing cooking nearby. By Friday night, I had already made up my mind. The moment the market opened, I was going back. I didn't care what animal it came from anymore. I only knew one thing. I needed another piece. The next Saturday morning, I arrived at the market earlier than usual. I told myself I was just looking for answers. That I wanted to know what kind of animal the meat had really come from. That was the reason. At least, that was what I tried to believe. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I wasn't there because I was curious. I was there because I wanted more. I walked past the familiar stalls, the fishermen, the fruit sellers, the people calling out prices. And then I saw him, Derek, standing exactly where he always stood, quiet, still, as if he had been waiting for me. The moment our eyes met, something changed in his expression. Not surprise, not happiness, recognition, like he had expected this visit. I stopped in front of his table. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then I finally spoke. Do you have more of that meat? Derek didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved over my face, studying me. You mean the one from last week? My stomach tightened. Yes. A faint smile appeared. Not a friendly smile. Something colder. How much do you want? The question should have bothered me. Instead, my mouth answered before I thought. Everything you have. Derek looked down. Behind him, hidden beneath a cloth, were several wrapped packages. He placed them on the table one by one. 5 pounds. Maybe more. I paid without negotiating. I didn't even question the price. I simply took the package and left. The walk home felt shorter than it should have. The entire time, I could think about only one thing. Eating. Claire noticed immediately. She was sitting outside when I arrived. Her smile faded when she saw what I was carrying. Daniel. What? That's a lot of meat. I avoided her eyes. I was hungry. Something about my answer frightened her. She didn't argue. She just watched me. And I hated that look. The look people give you when they realize something is changing. That afternoon, I cooked the meat. I didn't wait for dinner. I didn't prepare vegetables. I didn't sit with my family. I barely even noticed the taste this time. The moment it touched my mouth, my body reacted, like it had been waiting. I ate quickly, too quickly. The meat was barely cooked. Claire stood in the doorway, silent. Daniel. I stopped. For a moment, I realized how I must have looked. But the thought disappeared almost instantly. Because the hunger was louder. The entire package was gone within 2 days. All of it. And when the last piece was finished, the hunger remained. Actually, it felt stronger. Claire began watching me carefully after that. She noticed things I tried to ignore. My clothes hanging looser. The dark circles beneath my eyes. The way I kept opening the refrigerator even when there was nothing inside. I was eating more than ever. But I looked weaker, paler. Like the food wasn't giving me energy. Like it was taking something instead. Then, one night, Claire woke up to a sound coming from the kitchen. A slow, wet sound. Chewing. She sat up in bed. The house was completely dark. Everyone was asleep. Or at least, she thought everyone was. She walked quietly down the hallway, and when she reached the kitchen, she saw me standing in front of the open refrigerator, eating directly from the package. The meat was raw. Blood ran down my hands, and when I turned toward her, she saw my eyes. They weren't the eyes of the man she married. They were empty, exactly like Derek's. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Claire stood frozen in the kitchen doorway. I stood there with the refrigerator light shining across my face, my hands covered in blood, the unfinished piece of meat hanging between my fingers. The house was completely silent, except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and my breathing. Slow, heavy, unnatural. Daniel. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at her, but I wasn't fully there. At least, that's what she told me later. She said my expression changed the moment I realized she was watching. Like something inside me suddenly woke up. My fingers loosened. The meat slipped from my hand and fell onto the floor. I blinked several times. The room seemed to come back into focus. The cold tiles beneath my feet. The open refrigerator. Claire standing there with tears in her eyes. I looked down at my hands, then at the blood, then at her. What? My voice broke. What am I doing? Claire didn't answer immediately. She couldn't, because she was too afraid. She had spent years knowing every expression on my face, every habit, every small gesture. But the person standing in that kitchen felt like a stranger wearing my body. That night, she didn't let me stay alone. The next morning, she took me to the local clinic. I didn't argue. I was scared too. The doctor examined me carefully. Blood tests, physical tests, neurological checks. Everything came back normal. No infection, no disease, no explanation for the hunger. Finally, the doctor sat across from me and asked a simple question. Have you eaten anything unusual recently? I looked at Claire. She looked back at me. Neither of us wanted to answer. But eventually, I told him. The market, the cellar, the meat. The doctor stopped writing. What kind of meat? Wild boar. His expression changed instantly. Wild boar. I nodded. That's impossible. The room became quiet. What do you mean? The doctor leaned back. Where we live, there are no wild boars. A cold sensation moved through my body. I thought about Derek standing behind that table. The way he never explained where the meat came from. The way he only said, "The deep woods." The doctor looked at me seriously. Who sold this to you? Derek. The doctor frowned. Derek who? I don't know. Where does he sell? The market. He slowly shook his head. I've lived here my entire life. I've never heard of anyone by that name selling meat. I felt the room become smaller. The doctor's next words made my stomach drop. Sometimes people sell things they shouldn't. Things that were never meant to become food. And for the first time, I wondered if the thing I had been eating was never an animal at all. I left the clinic feeling like the ground beneath me had changed. The entire walk home, one thought repeated in my mind. If it wasn't wild boar, then what had I been eating? I tried to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe the animal had been something rare. Maybe Derek was just another strange hunter who didn't like answering questions. But every explanation collapsed the moment I remembered his face. The way he looked at me. The way he seemed to know I would return. That wasn't the look of a seller. It was the look of someone waiting for something to happen. The following Saturday, I returned to the market. I arrived before the usual time. My eyes searched every stall, every corner, every person carrying supplies. But Derek was nowhere. His table wasn't there. No packages. No wooden boxes. Nothing. I walked through the market asking everyone I could, "Do you know the man who sells wild meat?" People looked confused. "What man?" "The one who comes by canoe." Nobody knew what I was talking about. Some laughed nervously. Others simply walked away. It was as if Derek had never existed. Then, as I was about to leave, an elderly fisherman grabbed my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "You are looking for the meat seller, aren't you?" I turned toward him. Yes. His expression changed. The friendliness disappeared. "Forget him." "Why?" He looked around before lowering his voice. "Because that man brings trouble." My heart started beating faster. What kind of trouble? The old fisherman hesitated. Then he motioned for me to follow him away from the crowd. Years ago, people started disappearing. The sounds of the market seemed to fade. People who went into the forest and never came back. I swallowed. Did they find them? Some. His eyes dropped. Not all. A cold feeling spread through my chest. What does that have to do with Derek? The old man looked uncomfortable. There were rumors. What rumors? He took a long breath. That someone was selling meat. I felt sick. My mouth went dry. Human meat. He didn't answer immediately. That silence was worse than any confirmation. "Nobody ever proved it," he finally said. "But after they arrested one man connected to those disappearances, things stopped." "Then why are you telling me this?" The old fisherman looked directly into my eyes. "Because people said he wasn't working alone." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "He had someone helping him. Someone who was never found." I didn't wait for anything else. I ran home. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached the house, I locked every door, every window. I told Claire everything. The color disappeared from her face. Neither of us spoke for a long time. That night, we sat in the darkness, listening, waiting. At first, nothing happened. Then, just after midnight, 3 slow knocks came from the front door. The sound echoed through the entire house. 3 knocks. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Neither Claire nor I moved. We simply stared toward the hallway. The second knock had been loud enough to make the windows vibrate. The third one felt different. Not like someone asking to come inside. Like someone reminding us they already knew where we lived. My breathing became shallow. Claire grabbed my arm. "Don't." Her voice was barely audible. I wanted to listen. Every part of me wanted to stay away from that door. But I already knew who was standing outside. Slowly, I got up. Each step across the floor felt impossibly loud. I reached the hallway. Stopped. The front door was only a few feet away. Another sound came from the other side. A quiet movement. Something heavy being shifted. I looked through the window beside the door. At first, I saw only darkness. Then a figure stepped slightly into the weak light coming from the porch. Derek. He was standing there, exactly as he had at the market. Calm. Silent. Unbothered. Except this time, he wasn't carrying a small package. He had a large sack thrown over his shoulder. The material was dark. Wet. Something dripped slowly from the bottom. A drop hit the ground. Then another. Even from inside the house, I could smell it. The metallic smell of blood. Derek looked up and smiled. Not a normal smile. A smile from someone who already knew the ending. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the old knife from the kitchen counter, the one I used when preparing fish. My hands shook as I opened the door. Leave. My voice came out rough. Derek, leave now. He didn't react. He simply lowered the sack from his shoulder. It hit the ground with a heavy sound. Thud. The knot holding it closed loosened. The opening fell apart. And what came out wasn't meat. Not the kind sold at a market. Not the kind anyone should ever see. Blood. Bones. Pieces that should never have been inside a bag meant for food. My body reacted before my mind understood. I stepped backward. My stomach twisted. I covered my mouth. Derek watched me silently. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, almost gentle. You ate. I couldn't answer. You tasted it. His eyes stayed fixed on mine. Now you are part of the family. The words made my skin crawl. What family? For the first time, his smile disappeared. Family takes care of family. He stepped closer. And family brings more. Behind me, I heard Claire gasp. She understood too. The meat wasn't just food. It wasn't just a trap. It was a way of spreading something. Everyone who ate became another link. Another person who would eventually bring someone else. The hunger, the need, the curse. It passed from one person to another. And somehow, Derek had known exactly what would happen to me. I tightened my grip on the knife. Not because I thought it would protect me. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't. But holding something in my hand made me feel less powerless. Derek didn't look afraid. He didn't even look angry. He simply stood there, watching me struggle with the truth I had spent days trying to avoid. You did this to me. The words came out before I could stop them. Derek tilted his head slightly. No. His voice remained calm. You chose to eat. That answer disturbed me more than anything else. Because he was right. I had taken the package. I had cooked the meat. I had taken the first bite. The hunger had come afterward. But the choice had been mine. At least, that was what I wanted to believe. Claire stepped beside me. Get away from us. Derek looked at her. For the first time, his expression changed. Not sympathy. Not anger. Recognition. You should be careful. Claire stepped back. Careful of what? Derek looked toward the house. Then back at us. The first hunger is always the strongest. A cold feeling moved through my chest. What happens now? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the open sack on the ground. Then at me. Now you understand. Understand what? That it never ends with one person. The words stayed with me, even after he left. Because that was the part one feared most. Not what I had eaten. Not even what I had become. It was the thought that somehow I was supposed to continue it. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then the windows. Then every entrance I could find. Claire called the police. I stayed near the front door, watching through the curtains, waiting for Derek to appear again. But he never did. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Finally, headlights appeared outside. The police arrived. We rushed outside. But the street was empty. No Derek. No canoe. No sack. Nothing. The officers searched the area. The yard. The road. The surrounding houses. They found no trace, not even a footprint. It was as if he had never been there. But the smell remained. For days afterward, I couldn't enter the kitchen without feeling sick. I stopped eating meat completely. Fish, chicken, anything. The thought of it made my stomach turn. I stopped going to the market, stopped fishing, stopped leaving the house unless absolutely necessary. People in the village thought I was sick. They were right, just not in the way they imagined. Because even after everything, even after knowing the truth, the hunger never disappeared. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up suddenly. My mouth feels dry. My heart races. And for a few seconds, before I remember where I am, I can taste it again. That same strange sweetness. The same flavor that started everything. And when I look across the room, at my sleeping children, I feel ashamed, because a part of me is still afraid. Afraid that the hunger is not gone, only waiting. Years have passed since that day. My life never returned to what it was before. People in the village eventually stopped asking questions. They stopped inviting me to fish. Stopped asking why I disappeared from the market. They created their own explanations. Some thought I had become sick. Others thought I had lost my mind. I never corrected them. The truth was too difficult to explain. How do you tell someone that a simple piece of meat changed everything? How do you explain that something can enter your body and leave behind a hunger that doesn't belong to you? I tried everything. Different foods, different routines, different ways to distract myself. Nothing worked. Because the problem was never my stomach. It was the memory, the taste, that strange sweetness that remained hidden somewhere inside my mind. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up suddenly. My heart is beating fast. The room is dark. My family is asleep. And for a few seconds, I forget where I am. All I can remember is that flavor, that impossible sweetness, that feeling of wanting something I know I should never have wanted. Then I look at my children sleeping peacefully, and I remind myself why I fought, why I stopped, why I never followed Derek's path. Because some things are not just about hunger. Some things are about losing the part of yourself that still knows right from wrong. But there is one thing that still bothers me. Every year, people continue talking about a strange seller who appears at markets across the region. A man who arrives alone. A man who sells fresh meat, clean cuts, good prices, always quiet, always leaving before anyone can ask where he came from. Some say his name is different now. Some say it's still Derek. But everyone describes him the same way. The same empty eyes. The same silence. The same feeling that something about him isn't human. And every time I hear those stories, I wonder how many people have already taken that first bite. How many people have already tasted what I tasted. How many people are carrying that hunger without understanding where it came from. Because some flavors disappear after a meal. Some memories fade with time. But there are things you consume that never truly leave you. And there are hungers that once awakened, never sleep again. The last breath. There are confessions that should be spoken while we are still alive. Because once death arrives, some of them don't stay buried. This story takes place in a small rural town line in 2014. Ethan Carter worked as an ambulance driver for the local emergency medical service. He had seen everything: accidents, heart attacks, births in the back of the ambulance. But nothing prepared him for that Wednesday afternoon. The call came from a remote farmhouse. An elderly woman had collapsed. Her name was Linda Morales. When Ethan and his partner Daniel Brooks arrived, the house felt off. Too quiet. Linda was lying on the bed, pale, sweating, barely breathing. Her daughter, Sophia Morales, was crying uncontrollably. They loaded her into the ambulance immediately. At first, it looked like a standard emergency, but halfway to the hospital, everything changed. Her condition rapidly collapsed. Monitors screamed. Daniel tried everything: oxygen, medication, for fluids. But Linda was slipping away. And then, her eyes opened. She grabbed Daniel's arm with unexpected strength and whispered, "I need to confess something." Daniel tried to calm her, but before she could say anything else, she stopped breathing. Ethan pulled over the ambulance. Silence filled the vehicle. Daniel checked her pulse. Nothing. "She's gone," he said quietly. But when Ethan looked in the rearview mirror, he saw something that didn't make sense. Linda was sitting upright on the stretcher, staring directly at him. He blinked, and she was back down, dead. Still, the body was returned to the family. The funeral happened quickly, but Ethan couldn't shake what he saw. At the wake, something felt wrong. The air was heavy. A strange, sour smell lingered around the coffin, too strong for someone who had just died. That night, Ethan dreamed of her, sitting inside the ambulance, trying to speak. But no sound ever came out. Just the same words again and again. "I need to confess." A week later, another emergency call came. Same farmhouse. Same family. Sophia was screaming when Ethan arrived. "She's here again. I saw her. My mother was standing in my room." Ethan entered the house and froze. On the bedroom wall, written in dirt, "I need to confess." Ethan started asking questions. Neighbors avoided his gaze, until an old woman finally spoke. Years ago, Linda had another child, a baby boy. He died in his crib. Officially, sudden infant death syndrome. But people in the village whispered something different. That the child wasn't cared for properly. That the cries were ignored. And that one night, they simply stopped. Ethan felt sick. That night, he heard something outside his window. A soft knock. Then another. Slow. Persistent. When he opened the curtain, Linda was there, standing outside the glass. Wet. Dirty. Wearing funeral clothes. She pressed her hand against the window and whispered, "Help me confess." Ethan went to the church. He told Father Thomas everything. The priest listened in silence, then spoke calmly. "There are souls that cannot rest without confession, but they cannot speak it anymore. So someone must speak it for them." That night, Ethan entered the confession booth and confessed everything, not as himself, but in her name. The silence afterward felt different, lighter. The nightmares stopped. The presence disappeared. For the first time, Ethan thought it was over. 1 week later, Ethan was driving near the cemetery road. Fog covered the ground. Slowly, he reduced speed. Something was standing by the roadside. A small figure. A child. Barefoot. Still. Ethan stopped the car. Looked closer. The child turned its head and smiled. But it wasn't a normal smile. It was empty. Cold. Like something that had never been alive long enough to forget. And in that moment, Ethan understood. The confession didn't free everything. It only moved the weight. Some sins don't disappear. They just find someone else to look at. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And tell me in the comments, do you think the confession freed her, or only transferred what she carried? Some traditions survive because people are afraid to question them. In small rural communities, where generations are born and buried on the same stretch of land, there are women everyone trusts without ever asking why. They aren't doctors. They don't have degrees hanging on their walls. But when labor begins in the middle of the night, people call them before they call anyone else. Most outsiders dismiss that as superstition. Rebecca used to be one of them. She had graduated from nursing school 3 years earlier and had accepted a position at a small health clinic serving several isolated farming communities. It wasn't glamorous work, but she loved it. Every day was different, and she took pride in helping people who often had nowhere else to go. There was only one thing she could never understand. Pregnant women from the surrounding countryside almost never came in for prenatal care. Some wouldn't visit the clinic until the final weeks of pregnancy. Others arrived only after labor had already begun. Whenever Rebecca encouraged them to schedule regular checkups, the answer was almost always identical. "We don't need them." She'd smile politely. "You really should. It's safer for both you and the baby." The women would exchange knowing looks before answering. "Miss Eleanor is taking care of everything." Rebecca heard that name constantly. Every week. Every month. Miss Eleanor. She lived in an old farming village about 10 miles outside town and had been delivering babies for longer than anyone could remember. According to local stories, she was well into her 80s. Some people claimed she had helped bring more than 1,000 children into the world. The stories became even more unbelievable after that. They said she had never lost a mother. Never lost a child. Not once. Rebecca always smiled when she heard those claims. People in close-knit communities loved to exaggerate. One successful delivery became 10. 10 became 100. Eventually, legends replaced facts. She respected the elderly midwife's experience, but she trusted medicine far more than folklore. Then, one cold Friday before dawn, a young pregnant woman arrived at the clinic in active labor. She was terrified. Rebecca immediately noticed there were no prenatal records. "No checkups?" she asked while helping her onto the examination bed. The woman shook her head. Miss Eleanor said everything was fine. Rebecca frowned. Then why didn't she deliver the baby herself? The expectant mother's face lost what little color remained. For several seconds, she couldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said. The woman swallowed hard. This one wasn't hers to bring into the world. For the first time since becoming a nurse, Rebecca felt something she couldn't explain. A quiet, unmistakable unease. As though the delivery room had suddenly become much colder, and whatever was about to be born had frightened the only woman in the region who was never afraid of childbirth. The delivery became far more difficult than anyone expected. The baby's heartbeat remained steady, but labor refused to progress. Hours passed. The young mother grew weaker with every contraction, losing far more blood than Rebecca was comfortable seeing. She called the physician on duty, and together they did everything they could to keep both mother and child stable. Finally, just before sunrise, a little girl was born. She cried immediately. Strong lungs, healthy color, perfect breathing. Every medical sign suggested a normal newborn. The relief inside the room was almost overwhelming. The young mother burst into tears the moment Rebecca laid the baby against her chest. For everyone else, the ordeal was over. For Rebecca, something had only just begun. As she lifted the infant for the first examination, an unexpected sensation ran through her body. The child wasn't unusually heavy, at least not physically. Yet the instant Rebecca held her, It felt as though an invisible weight had settled onto her arms and shoulders. The air around the delivery table seemed strangely dense, harder to breathe. Even the sounds inside the room became muffled for a brief second. She blinked. The feeling disappeared almost immediately. Long night, she muttered to herself. Exhaustion. That had to be it. She finished the examination. Healthy heartbeat. Normal reflexes. Perfect oxygen levels. There wasn't a single medical concern. She carried the baby back to her mother, who smiled through exhausted tears and kissed the little girl's forehead. By the end of her shift, Rebecca had almost convinced herself she'd imagined the strange feeling. Until Monday morning. The phone rang shortly after sunrise. It was a pediatric specialist from a regional hospital. The baby you delivered over the weekend was transferred here yesterday. Rebecca straightened in her chair. Is she all right? There was a long pause. That's the problem. The doctor's voice sounded unusually uncertain. Every test comes back normal. Rebecca frowned. What symptoms? She won't eat. Another pause. She doesn't cry. Silence again. And she almost never sleeps. Rebecca's grip tightened around the phone. What does she do? The answer unsettled her more than she expected. She just lies there. The doctor hesitated before continuing. Eyes open. Completely still. It feels like... He stopped himself. Like what? Another silence. Like she's watching something none of us can see. After the call ended, Rebecca couldn't focus on anything else. Every explanation she came up with fell apart. Healthy babies didn't simply stop eating. They didn't remain awake for hours without crying. And they certainly didn't puzzle an entire hospital. By that afternoon, one question kept repeating in her mind. Why had Miss Eleanor refused the delivery? Rebecca left work early and drove toward the small farming village everyone had mentioned for years. The farther she traveled, the quieter the roads became. Weathered fences replaced traffic lights. Old wooden homes stood scattered across open fields. Chickens wandered freely through dusty yards. Time itself seemed slower there. Everyone she asked pointed toward the same modest house at the very end of the road. A small porch. Fresh herbs hanging to dry. The unmistakable scent of mint drifting through the warm afternoon air. An elderly woman sat quietly in a rocking chair, crushing herbs with a stone mortar. She looked up before Rebecca could introduce herself. I've been expecting you. Rebecca stopped walking. You know who I am? The old woman nodded once. You came because of the baby. And somehow, that answer frightened Rebecca more than if the woman had refused to speak at all. Rebecca stepped closer, forcing herself to stay calm. I need to understand what's happening to that child. Miss Eleanor didn't move from her chair. She kept grinding the herbs slowly, as if the conversation was already decided long before Rebecca arrived. I told the mother to go to the clinic, she said quietly. Rebecca frowned. Then why did you refuse the delivery? That question finally made the old woman stop. The mortar went still in her hands. For a moment, only the sound of insects filled the air around the porch. Then Miss Eleanor looked up. Because that child wasn't meant to be delivered by me. Rebecca felt a chill spread through her chest. That doesn't make any sense. It's a baby. The old woman's gaze didn't change. That's where you're wrong. She stood slowly, joints cracking softly, and walked toward a small wooden table beside the porch. On it sat a clay bowl filled with clear water. Look, she said. Rebecca hesitated, then stepped closer. The water looked ordinary, still, clean. Nothing unusual. I don't see anything, Rebecca said. Miss Eleanor's voice dropped lower. Look again. Don't blink. Something in her tone made Rebecca obey. She leaned forward, focused. At first, there was nothing, just her own reflection. Then, a shift, a faint distortion in the water's surface, like something moving beneath it. Rebecca leaned closer, narrowing her eyes. The shape was small at first, unclear, but slowly it began to form. Not floating, not swimming, just present. A dark blur shifting beneath the reflection, as if clinging to something unseen. Rebecca stumbled back immediately. What is that? Miss Eleanor exhaled through her nose, almost like she had expected that reaction. That is what came with the child. Rebecca shook her head. That's impossible. The baby is healthy. All the tests don't matter, the old woman interrupted. Her voice sharpened slightly now. Some children are born alone. Others arrive with something already attached. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. Attached to what? Miss Eleanor turned her gaze toward the distant fields, to the first hands that hold them. Silence hit the porch like a weight. Rebecca froze. I held her, she said slowly. Right after birth. I was the first. Miss Eleanor nodded. That's why I told the mother not to stay here. Rebecca's mind raced. That's not real. It can't be transferred like that. For the first time, the old woman showed something close to sadness. It doesn't care what you believe. A long pause followed. Then Miss Eleanor spoke again, softer now. Tell me, nurse, have you seen anything strange since that night? Rebecca opened her mouth, then stopped. The hospital report, the silence of the baby, the feeling in her arms, the way the air had seemed heavier for just a moment. A memory surfaced that made her stomach twist. She had been trying to ignore it ever since. Miss Eleanor watched her carefully, and quietly added, Then it has already noticed you. Rebecca took a step back without realizing it. The porch suddenly felt smaller, closer, like the air itself had shifted around her. That's not possible, she said, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. Miss Eleanor didn't follow her. She simply returned to the chair, as if the conversation had already reached its unavoidable end. It doesn't leave easily, the old woman said. Not once it finds a first touch. Rebecca shook her head again, faster this time. There has to be a medical explanation. Infection, neurological disorder, something we haven't identified yet. Miss Eleanor let out a quiet, tired sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You people always look for names to feel safe. The words landed heavier than Rebecca expected. A distant wind moved through the dry grass beyond the house, brushing against the porch like something passing too close. Miss Eleanor reached into a small cloth bag and pulled out a folded piece of fabric. Old, stained with herbs and thyme. She placed it on the table between them. When you feel it, she said, you will know. Rebecca stared at it. What am I supposed to do with that? The old woman's eyes stayed fixed on her. Keep it near you, and don't hold the child again. Rebecca let out a short breath. That's not an option. I work at a clinic. I can't just. You already touched it, Miss Eleanor interrupted. Silence followed. A long, uncomfortable silence that felt like it was pressing inward from all sides. Rebecca swallowed. Then why am I still fine? For the first time, Miss Eleanor looked away, and her answer came slower. As far as you know. That sentence stayed in the air long after she said it. Rebecca left the house without another word. The walk back to her car felt longer than the drive there. Every sound in the village seemed slightly off now. Too quiet. Too deliberate. Even the birds felt like they were watching her. She didn't sleep that night. At the clinic, she avoided the newborn's file for as long as she could. But by midday, she couldn't resist anymore. She went to the observation room. The baby lay exactly as described. Eyes open, still, silent, watching. Rebecca stood outside the glass for a long time before entering. When she finally stepped inside, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Slowly, subtly. The baby didn't move, didn't react, just stared. And for a brief moment, Rebecca felt it again. That same pressure from the delivery room. Not pain, not fear. Something quieter, heavier. Like something standing just behind her shoulders, close enough that she could almost feel its breath. She stepped back immediately. Her hand instinctively went to her arm, as if brushing something off. But there was nothing there. At least, nothing she could see. That night, as she left the hospital, she stopped at the entrance and looked back through the glass one last time. The newborn was still awake, still staring. But this time, it wasn't looking at the room anymore. It was looking in her direction. And somewhere deep inside Rebecca's mind, a thought formed that she couldn't explain. Not a fear, a certainty. Whatever had come with that child had finally learned where she was. The portrait of the dead family. There are things in the countryside that people should never bring into their homes. Objects that carry more than wood, paper, or ink. They carry memory, and sometimes, something that refuses to stay dead. If you enjoy unsettling stories from remote places, where ordinary objects become something else entirely, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell me where you're watching from. This story took place in a small rural, in the year 2016. A woman named Naomi worked restoring old furniture. It was her specialty. She bought antique pieces from auctions, estate sales, and forgotten storage rooms, restored them carefully, and sold them again. She had an eye for detail. She could tell the age of wood just by touching it, the value of a piece just by looking at its joints. One afternoon, she attended an auction inside an old abandoned house that had recently been cleared out. The previous owners had died with no heirs, and everything inside was being sold off. Naomi managed to win a beautiful jacaranda wooden dresser, covered in deep carved details. But when she went to collect it, the auction manager handed her something else. A cardboard box. He said there had been something inside one of the drawers. He almost threw it away, but decided to let her choose. Inside the box were old photographs, black and white portraits, yellowed by time. Families, couples, children, elderly people standing stiffly in front of old houses. And among them, a larger framed photograph in silver. A family portrait. A father, a mother, and 5 children. All of them standing straight, staring directly at the camera with serious expressions. Naomi thought it was beautiful. She kept the silver frame. It could be valuable. As for the photo, she almost discarded it. Instead, she left it in a corner of her workshop, leaning against the wall. At first, nothing happened. For several days, everything stayed normal. Until Naomi began noticing something wrong. Every time she looked at the photograph, something had changed. At first, she counted 7 people, then 8, then 9, and the new faces were not posing. They were looking directly at her. Naomi told herself it was impossible, a mistake. Old photos could play tricks on the eyes. But the next day, she counted again. 8 figures. There was now a small girl on the left side. A girl she swore had not been there before. She leaned closer. The image looked slightly blurred around the girl's edges, as if she had moved during the moment the photo was taken. Unsettling, but still explainable. A defect in old printing, maybe. 2 days later, she looked again. 9 figures. Now there was an older man wearing a hat on the right side, partially cut off by the edge of the frame, as if he had stepped into the photograph after it had already been taken. Naomi felt a cold shiver run through her body. She took a picture of the photograph with her phone, just to be sure she wasn't imagining things. But when she opened the image on her screen, she dropped the phone immediately. The people had moved again. The little girl was closer to the center. The old man was now a step forward. That's when Naomi decided to investigate. She returned to the auction house and asked about the previous owners. The house had belonged to a family of German immigrants who settled in the region in the early 20th century. The last descendant, an elderly woman named Hilda Kenning, had died alone at the age of 93. And the rest of the family? The auction manager hesitated. He said there had been an old tragedy, a fire in the 1940s. A house completely burned down. Several members of the family died inside. Naomi returned to her workshop shaken. She looked at the photograph again. 10 figures now, and every new face shared the same detail. Burn marks, charred skin, torn clothing, ash-stained hair. Naomi stepped back slowly, because now she understood. These were not additions to a photograph. They were the dead, returning to the frame. And something in that image was still changing. They were entering the photograph, one by one, and by then, Naomi already understood. Some pictures don't capture moments. They trap them. And when time weakens, they try to escape. Naomi tried to get rid of it. She threw the photograph in the trash. The next morning, it was back in her workshop, leaning against the same wall. She burned it next. The silver frame melted almost instantly, but the photograph itself didn't catch fire. She tried tearing it apart. The paper felt wrong. Not like paper at all. Like fabric that refused to break. And with every failed attempt, more figures appeared. 11, 12, 13. All of them burned. All of them moving closer to the center of the image. And then Naomi noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the mirror behind her, they were no longer inside the photograph. They were inside the room, standing silently around her workshop. She turned around instantly, breathing heavily. Nothing. No one. Only silence. She looked back at the mirror. They were still there. Closer now. Naomi reached out for help. She found a woman known locally as Lorena, an old folk healer from the region. Lorena arrived, looked at the photograph, and went pale. "This is a portal," she said quietly. "A photograph of people who died carrying something unfinished, something the earth never accepted. They are trapped inside the image. And when the photo is brought into the world again, they start to come out." Naomi's voice shook. "How do I stop it?" Lorena didn't hesitate. "You have to return it to where it came from, and bury it with them." That same night, Naomi went back to the abandoned house where the photograph had been found. The place felt heavier now. The windows were broken. The walls smelled like old smoke. She walked through the silence until she reached the backyard. She dug a hole, placed the photograph inside, covered it with earth, and whispered a prayer she barely knew how to say. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps inside the house. Slow, deliberate. Naomi turned toward the window. They were there. All of them. The burned faces. Standing perfectly still. Watching her. And then, one by one, they smiled. Naomi ran. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. She didn't breathe properly until she reached her home and locked every door. But that night, as she passed the bathroom mirror, she froze. She was inside the photograph. Standing among them, the 13 figures, all facing forward, all staring at something she could no longer see. And slowly, she began to smell smoke. Because some images don't hold memories, they hold prisons. And sometimes, when you try to free what is trapped inside, you take its place.